My sister Diane had been dead for 3 days when her daughter slipped a brass key into my hand beside the open casket. "Mom said only you could have it," Rachel whispered. And she said, "Uncle Michael must never see it." But Michael was already standing behind us. The moment his eyes landed on the key, the color drained from his face. His hand closed around my wrist so tightly that I nearly cried out. "Give it to me, Karen," he said. Diane wasn't thinking clearly at the end. I looked at my brother, then at my sister, lying peacefully beneath the white roses. Michael wasn't grieving. He was terrified, and when I closed my fingers around that key, I knew Diane had left me something powerful enough to frighten the man who believed he controlled our entire family. Before I tell you what that key opened, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, do you think Michael's reaction came from grief, guilt, or fear? I'd also love to know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Sometimes it helps to remember that no matter how far apart we are, we can still sit together and share a story like this. People always say grief comes in waves. For me, it came in memories. The morning after Diane's funeral, I woke before sunrise in the guest bedroom of her old house. For a few quiet seconds, I forgot why I was there. Then I heard the floorboards creak beneath my feet, smelled the faint scent of lavender that had always drifted through Diane's home, and remembered the brass key resting inside my coat pocket. I closed my hand around it. Cold, heavy, real. Whatever my sister had left behind, she had trusted me to find it. I only wished she had trusted me years earlier. Or perhaps I wished I had given her a reason to. I walked downstairs to the kitchen where Rachel was already sitting at the table with a mug of untouched coffee. Dark circles framed her eyes. She looked like someone who hadn't slept in weeks. "I made breakfast," she said quietly. The toast had gone cold. Neither of us touched it. For several minutes, we simply sat in silence, listening to the old grandfather clock in the hallway tick away another morning without Diane. Finally, Rachel looked at me. "My mom missed you." Her words hit harder than I expected. "I missed her too." Rachel gave me a sad smile. "She never stopped talking about you." I lowered my eyes. "Then why did we stop talking to each other?" Rachel hesitated. "I don't think either of you really wanted to." That answer stayed with me long after she left the room. The truth was painfully simple. Diane and I had once been inseparable. Growing up in Cedar Hollow, we shared everything. We shared a bedroom until I left for college. We shared clothes, birthday cakes, secrets, and dreams. After our father died from a heart attack, Diane was only 16. Instead of enjoying her teenage years, she became a second mother to Michael and me. She cooked dinner every night because Mom worked double shifts at the nursing home. She helped me with homework. She stitched patches onto Michael's torn jeans whenever he came home after climbing fences or getting into trouble. If Michael broke a neighbor's window playing baseball, Diane apologized. If I forgot my lunch at school, Diane walked 3 miles just to bring it to me. She always put everyone else first, especially Michael. He was the youngest, the charming one, the boy who somehow convinced every adult that his mistakes were accidents. Even as children, Michael had a remarkable ability to escape consequences. He could smile through almost anything. If he broke something, he cried. If he lied, he apologized just enough to sound believable. And somehow Diane always stepped between him and the punishment. "He's still learning," she'd say. "He didn't mean it. He'll do better next time." She believed kindness could change people. I believed her. For many years, so did everyone else. Life carried us in different directions. I became a librarian in Pittsburgh, surrounded by quiet shelves and predictable routines. Diane married James Parker. Together they opened a small sewing shop that slowly became part of Cedar Hollow's history. Women came from neighboring towns just to have Diane alter wedding dresses or repair treasured quilts. James adored her. You could see it every time he looked across the shop. Michael, meanwhile, started Brown & Sons Construction. At first, everything seemed perfect. His business expanded quickly. He bought a larger house. He drove expensive trucks. At family dinners, everyone congratulated him for becoming successful. I remember James once whispering to me after Thanksgiving dinner, "Success that grows too fast usually has deep roots or borrowed money." At the time, I laughed. Now I wondered if he had seen warning signs long before the rest of us. When the housing market slowed several years later, Michael arrived at Diane's house looking exhausted. He told us one project had failed. Another investor had backed out. If he couldn't pay his workers, the company would collapse. "I just need a little help," he said. "Once this subdivision sells, I'll pay every penny back." James looked skeptical. Diane didn't. She reached for Michael's hand. "We're family." Those two words became the beginning of everything. The first loan wasn't enormous. Then came another, and another. Michael always had an explanation. A supplier hadn't delivered materials. A client hadn't paid. The bank needed temporary collateral. Every problem sounded temporary. Every promise sounded sincere. Whenever I questioned it, Diane defended him. "He's trying. You know how stressful business can be. I can't let my little brother lose everything." James became quieter each year. Sometimes I caught him studying financial papers at the kitchen table long after everyone else had gone to bed. He rarely argued with Diane directly, but I could tell he worried. Then James died unexpectedly after suffering a stroke. The strongest voice urging caution disappeared overnight. Michael became the person Diane leaned on most. At first, I thought he was simply helping his widowed sister. He drove her to appointments. He handled paperwork. He offered to organize bills. I insisted she shouldn't have to worry about finances while grieving. Looking back now, I see something completely different. He wasn't helping. He was positioning himself. Around that same time, Diane and I began drifting apart. It didn't happen because we stopped loving each other. It happened because every conversation ended with Michael. I'd tell her she was trusting him too much. She'd accuse me of judging him unfairly. I'd remind her about another loan. She'd remind me I wasn't the one living nearby. Eventually, our weekly phone calls became monthly. Monthly became holidays. Then, birthdays. The silence between us grew so gradually that neither of us realized how large it had become. 3 years ago, Diane called me unexpectedly. "Karen," she said softly, "if anything ever happens to me—" I interrupted her. "Nothing's going to happen." She didn't argue. Instead, she said something I never forgot. "If you ever have to choose who to believe, trust Rachel." I laughed nervously. "What are you talking about?" "Just promise me." "I promise." At the time, I assumed grief had changed her after losing James. I thought loneliness made her anxious. I didn't ask another question. Over the next 2 years, she called several more times. Each conversation felt unfinished. "There are things I can't explain over the phone. I'll tell you when you visit. I need you to understand something about Michael." But I always found an excuse. Work, weather, a book club meeting, a doctor's appointment. "I'll come next month." Next month never came. Now there would never be another phone call. Never another chance to ask what she had been trying so desperately to tell me. Rachel gently placed a folded napkin in front of me. I realized tears had fallen onto the kitchen table. "I found this in Mom's recipe book," she whispered. Inside was a handwritten note in Diane's familiar script. Just one sentence. "Karen always sees what everyone else misses." My chest tightened. If my sister had believed that, why hadn't I seen what was happening to her? The house felt different after everyone else had gone home. Funerals have a strange way of emptying a place. For a few hours, every room is crowded with flowers, whispered condolences, and people carrying casseroles they know no one will eat. Then suddenly, the cars disappear. The voices fade, and all that remains is silence. Diane's silence was everywhere. Her reading glasses still rested beside the living room lamp. A half-finished crossword puzzle lay folded on the coffee table. Her favorite blue cardigan still hung on the back of the kitchen chair, as if she might walk downstairs at any moment and slip it over her shoulders. Rachel stood in the hallway, staring toward her mother's bedroom. "I still can't go in there," she admitted quietly. "You don't have to." She nodded, but her eyes remained fixed on the closed door. Before either of us could say another word, the front door opened without a knock. Michael. He walked inside, carrying a leather briefcase as though he owned the house already. His black suit from the funeral had been replaced by an expensive navy jacket, and his expression had changed too. The grieving younger brother had disappeared. In his place stood a businessman. "Good," he said. "You're both here." Rachel frowned. "You could have called first. I don't need permission to visit my sister's house." The way he emphasized my sister's house made something tighten inside me. I wasn't mourning Diane anymore. He was already thinking about what she had left behind. Michael placed the briefcase on the dining room table and removed several neatly organized folders. "I've already spoken with Diane's accountant," he announced, "and I've contacted the estate attorney." Rachel looked confused. "You already did?" "Someone has to handle these things." He slid a stack of papers across the table. "There are outstanding medical bills." He placed another folder beside it. "Property taxes." Then another. "A home maintenance loan." Rachel blinked. "What loan?" Michael sighed dramatically. "Your mother didn't tell you everything. My mom said this house was paid off years ago. Your mother forgot many things during her final months." The sentence hung in the room like poison. I looked directly at him. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Michael met my eyes without hesitation. Diane wasn't always thinking clearly near the end. I felt my jaw tighten. "The doctors never told us that." "They didn't have to." Rachel's voice shook. "My mother knew exactly who I was every single day." Michael smiled patiently, the same smile I'd seen him use as a boy whenever he wanted adults to believe him. Memory problems don't always happen all at once. I had seen that smile hundreds of times. For the first time in my life, I wasn't fooled by it. "You seem awfully prepared," I said. "I believe in planning ahead. For a funeral. For reality." He opened another folder. "The house should be listed within 2 weeks." Rachel stared at him. "What?" "The estate can't carry unnecessary expenses." "I'm still living here. For now. You can't sell my mother's house." Michael folded his hands calmly. "I can, if the estate requires it." Rachel looked at me, panic spreading across her face. "Aunt Karen?" I turned back toward Michael. "I'd like to see documentation for every debt you just mentioned." His smile disappeared. "Why?" "Because that's how estates work." "I've already reviewed everything." "I haven't." "You don't need to." "I think I do." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Michael leaned back in his chair. "It's interesting." "What is?" "You weren't around when Diane needed help." The accusation landed exactly where he intended. "You lived 200 miles away. You visited twice in 3 years." "I was working." "So was I." "I never claimed otherwise." "I was the one driving her to appointments." I handled her prescriptions. I paid her bills. I made sure she had groceries. He pointed toward the hallway. You weren't here. Every sentence carried just enough truth to make the lie more believable. I hadn't been there. That guilt would stay with me forever. But guilt didn't erase facts. It still doesn't explain why you're trying to sell the house 3 days after her funeral. Michael's voice hardened. Karen, don't make this difficult. Rachel suddenly spoke. My mother never wanted this house sold. Michael looked at her almost pityingly. Your mother also believed Ethan would come home someday. The room froze. Neither Rachel nor I had mentioned Ethan. Michael watched our faces carefully. Then he smiled again. Some dreams never come true. Without another word, Rachel stood up and walked into the kitchen. I followed her. The moment the swinging door closed behind us, she grabbed my arm. He's lying. I know. No. She shook her head desperately. You don't understand. She glanced toward the dining room to make sure Michael couldn't hear. During the last 6 months, he came here almost every day. What did he do? He always said he was helping Mom. Helping how? He'd bring paperwork. What kind? I don't know. He never let me read it. My heartbeat quickened. Did Diane sign anything? Rachel nodded slowly. Sometimes. Did she know what she was signing? Rachel swallowed hard. I honestly don't know. She wrapped her arms around herself. Some days she was tired after chemotherapy treatments. But she still knew who everyone was. She remembered birthdays. She remembered recipes. She remembered conversations we'd had weeks earlier. Rachel looked me straight in the eyes. She wasn't confused. What happened when Michael brought papers? He'd ask me to leave the room. Every time. Almost. And your mother. She'd tell me it was okay. Rachel hesitated before adding the next sentence. But after he left. What? She usually cried. A cold chill moved through my body. Cried? Rachel nodded. Sometimes I'd ask what was wrong. What did she say? Nothing. She'd just tell me she was tired. I thought about the recording inside the storage locker. About Diane saying Michael checked her mail. About the warning she'd whispered years earlier. Pieces that once seemed unrelated were beginning to fit together. What about the key? I asked. Rachel glanced instinctively toward the living room. I kept it hidden. Where? In Mom's sewing box. Did Michael know? I don't think so. Why did she choose you? Rachel took a deep breath. About a week before she died, her voice became almost a whisper. She called me into her bedroom. She could barely sit up. She handed me that brass key. What exactly did she say? Rachel closed her eyes, remembering every word. Rachel, if your Uncle Michael ever asks about this key, tell him you don't know what he's talking about. And then, give it to Karen. Only Karen. Not before the funeral. Not after. During the funeral. I frowned. Why then? I asked the same question. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. Mom said... She paused. Because that's the only moment Michael won't be able to stop you. Neither of us spoke. The realization settled over us slowly. Diane hadn't simply hidden evidence. She had anticipated Michael's every move. She knew he would search the house. She knew he would take control after her death. She even knew the funeral would be the safest place to pass the key. A knock on the kitchen door interrupted us. Michael stood there. I should get going. He picked up his briefcase and walked toward the front door. As I followed him outside, he stopped halfway down the porch steps. Without looking back, he said quietly, "There are some doors a family is better off leaving closed." I slipped my hand into my coat pocket and wrapped my fingers around the brass key. Then I answered just as softly, "If Diane wanted one of those doors opened." I paused. "I'm going to open it." Michael slowly turned toward me. For the first time since I'd arrived in Cedar Hollow, there was no smile on his face. Only something far more dangerous. Fear. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Michael's warning. There are some doors a family is better off leaving closed. He hadn't sounded angry. He had sounded frightened, and frightened people often made dangerous decisions. By 7 the next morning, Rachel was already dressed. She stood in the kitchen, staring out the window, nervously pulling at the sleeve of her sweater. "I kept thinking about what Mom said," she admitted. "So did I." "Do you think Uncle Michael knows where the key goes?" "I don't know. But I'm certain he knows what it leads to." Neither of us needed to say anything else. After a quick breakfast, neither of us actually tasted. We began searching the house. The obvious places came first. Diane's desk. Every drawer opened smoothly. The brass key fit none of them. Next came the old filing cabinet in the study. Rachel handed me folders while I tested every lock. Nothing. The cedar chest in Diane's bedroom. Nothing. A jewelry box James had built for her anniversary. Nothing. An antique writing cabinet in the living room. Nothing. The lock on the old garden shed. Still nothing. By lunchtime, frustration had replaced our optimism. Rachel dropped into a chair. "What if we're looking in the wrong place?" I turned the key over in my fingers for what must have been the 100th time. It wasn't an ordinary house key. It was heavier, older. The brass had darkened with age, except for one edge that looked strangely polished, as though someone had handled it frequently. I carried it toward the window where sunlight spilled across the kitchen counter. Something caught my eye. Tiny numbers, almost invisible. I reached for Diane's magnifying glass from the drawer beside the refrigerator. Rachel leaned over my shoulder. "What is it?" "There." She squinted. "I can't read it." I adjusted the glass. "It's engraved." "What does it say?" I smiled for the first time since the funeral. 3. I rotated the key. 1. Another turn. 7. Rachel whispered it aloud. 3, 1, 7. We stared at each other. "That's not a house number," she said. "No. And it isn't a safe combination." I looked again. Just below the numbers sat another tiny engraving. Not letters, a picture. A small arch with 2 narrow pillars. Rachel suddenly gasped. "I've seen that before." "Where?" She thought for several seconds. "The old train station." "What?" "The entrance. It used to have those stone arches before they renovated it." I remembered immediately. Years ago, Cedar Hollow's historic train station had closed after freight service ended. The town eventually converted part of the building into offices and commercial storage units. I looked back at the key. Locker 3 and 17. Rachel's eyes widened. "You think—" "I think we're finally asking the right question." Less than 20 minutes later, we parked outside the old station. The building looked different than I remembered. The ticket booths had disappeared. Coffee shops occupied one side of the lobby, but the original stone entrance remained untouched. Exactly the same arch carved into the brass key. Rachel slowly exhaled. "My mom planned this." "Yes." "A long time ago." We entered the management office. A woman in her 50s looked up from behind the reception desk. "Can I help you?" I placed the brass key on the counter. "I hope so." Her expression changed immediately. Storage unit. I think so. She examined the number. Locker 317. My heartbeat quickened. So it exists. Oh, yes. She typed into her computer, then stopped. Her eyebrows lifted. That's unusual. What is, This locker has been rented continuously for almost 10 years. Rachel and I exchanged another glance. 10 years. Long before Diane became seriously ill. Long before anyone claimed she was confused. The receptionist continued reading. Automatic payments. Never missed. No late fees. No access recorded for... She frowned. About 14 months. Rachel whispered, Mom stopped coming after the cancer got worse. The woman nodded politely before reading another note on the screen. Then her face became serious. There are special instructions. My pulse began racing again. What kind of instructions? She looked directly at me. Are you Karen Brown? Yes. I'll need photo identification. I handed over my driver's license. She compared the information carefully. After another moment, she asked quietly, Do you also have a death certificate for Diane Parker? Rachel had brought one. She removed it from her folder. The receptionist studied both documents before nodding. The instructions state that after Miss Parker's death, she paused. Only Karen Brown is authorized to access locker 317. Rachel covered her mouth. What? The receptionist looked almost apologetic. Your mother left these instructions with our legal department several years ago. Several years? I repeated. Yes. I suddenly felt dizzy. Diane hadn't made this decision during the final weeks of her illness. She hadn't hidden the key because she thought she was dying. She had prepared this plan years in advance. She had expected this day. Expected Michael. Expected me. Rachel's voice trembled. So Mom knew. I think she knew she couldn't trust someone. The receptionist interrupted gently. There is one more requirement. What is it? A witness must be present when the locker is opened. My shoulders relaxed slightly. That's fine. We can come back. She smiled. Most families choose to bring an attorney. An attorney. David Miller. Exactly who Diane would have expected us to trust. The receptionist printed several forms. I can reserve access tomorrow morning. I signed without hesitation. As Rachel completed the remaining paperwork, I happened to glance through the office window. Something outside caught my attention. A black SUV, parked across the street. The driver wore sunglasses, but I recognized him instantly. Michael. He wasn't looking at this building. He was watching us. Watching me. The moment our eyes met through the glass, he reached for the steering wheel. The engine started. The SUV pulled away without entering the parking lot. Rachel followed my gaze. Oh my God. He followed us. I don't think he ever stopped. A heavy silence settled between us. If Michael already knew about the storage locker, why hadn't he opened it himself? The answer came almost immediately. Because he couldn't. Only Karen Brown. Only after Diane's death. Only with proof of her death. Diane had designed the instructions carefully enough to keep even Michael out. Rachel looked frightened. What if he comes back tonight? He might. What if he breaks into the locker? I shook my head. He can't. But the management office knows exactly who is allowed inside. And if Michael could have opened it, I looked back toward the empty street where his SUV had disappeared. He wouldn't have spent 3 days trying to take the key from me. Rachel slowly nodded. For the first time since the funeral, hope appeared in her eyes. We're close. I slipped the brass key back into my pocket. No. I looked toward the hallway leading to the storage rooms hidden beneath the old station. We're exactly where Diane wanted us to be. As we walked back toward the parking lot, I pulled out my phone. There was only one person I trusted enough to stand beside us when locker 3117 finally opened. David Miller answered on the second ring. Karen, I found where the key belongs. A brief silence. Then he asked quietly, Do you want me there? I looked once more at the empty road where Michael had been watching us only minutes earlier. More than ever, because whatever Diane had hidden inside locker 317, my brother was afraid of it. And tomorrow, we were finally going to find out why. The next morning, I arrived at the old train station 20 minutes early. I wasn't the only one. David Miller was already waiting outside, standing beside his silver sedan with a leather portfolio tucked beneath one arm. At 66, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent 4 decades settling family disputes before they became courtroom battles. He greeted me with a warm but tired smile. I'm sorry it had to happen this way, Karen. So am I. Rachel pulled into the parking lot a few moments later. She climbed out of her car, clutching a canvas tote bag that contained Diane's death certificate, several family documents, and a framed photograph of her mother. I don't know why I brought this, she admitted. David looked at the picture. Perhaps because your mother deserves to be here. Rachel nodded without speaking. None of us smiled again as we entered the building. The receptionist recognized us immediately. Good morning. She gathered our paperwork before leading us through a secured hallway that ordinary customers never entered. The farther we walked, the quieter the building became. The cheerful sounds from the coffee shop disappeared behind thick concrete walls. Old fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Rows of metal storage doors stretched endlessly in both directions. Locker 287, Locker 294, Locker 301. Finally, Locker 317. It was smaller than I expected. The door was painted dull gray, its number barely visible beneath years of dust. No one had touched it in a very long time. The receptionist turned toward me. Miss Brown, once this locker is opened, everything inside becomes your responsibility, unless otherwise specified by legal documents. I nodded. I understand. She stepped back. So does our office. The hallway fell silent. My hand slipped into my coat pocket. The brass key felt just as cold as it had at the funeral. Only now it seemed much heavier. I inserted it into the lock. For one terrifying second, nothing happened. Then I felt the old mechanism catch. A soft, metallic click echoed through the hallway. Rachel covered her mouth. David quietly removed a small notebook from his portfolio. I slowly lifted the handle. The metal door groaned loudly as it rolled upward. Dust drifted through the air. The locker wasn't full of furniture. There were no boxes of family photographs, no forgotten antiques. Everything inside had been carefully organized. One metal filing cabinet, 3 weatherproof plastic containers, a fireproof document safe, several labeled archive boxes. Nothing looked accidental. Everything looked intentional. Rachel whispered, My mom planned all of this. David stepped closer but didn't touch anything. She certainly did. Attached to the inside of the locker door was a large cream-colored envelope. Across the front, written in Diane's unmistakable handwriting, were 7 simple words. For Karen Brown. Open first. My hands trembled. I carefully broke the seal. Inside lay a handwritten letter. The paper had yellowed slightly with age. She hadn't written it recently. She had written it years before. I recognized her handwriting immediately. Steady, elegant, patient. I began reading aloud. Karen, if you are reading this, then I was right about two things. First, I am no longer here to protect this family. Second, Michael has already tried to stop you. Rachel burst into tears. David quietly lowered his eyes. I continued. Please don't blame yourself for staying away. I helped create the distance between us because I believed I could fix everything before you ever needed to know. I was wrong. The words blurred behind my tears. You once asked me why I always defended Michael. The answer is simple. I confused love with rescue. Every time he made another mistake, I believed saving him would finally change him. Instead, I only taught him that someone would always clean up the damage. I paused to steady my voice. Rachel squeezed my hand. David said quietly, "Keep going." I nodded. James warned me. More times than I can count. He begged me to stop lending Michael money. He begged me to protect our business. He begged me to let Michael face the consequences of his own decisions. I refused. My chest tightened. James had seen everything, long before the rest of us. The letter continued. After James died, I discovered how much control Michael already had over my finances. Some documents carried my signature. Others carried signatures that were not mine. David looked up immediately. What? I reread the sentence slowly. Others carried signatures that were not mine. The attorney's expression hardened. Forgery. Rachel stared at him. You mean? If Diane didn't sign them herself, that's exactly what it means. A chill swept through the room. The letter wasn't finished. Karen, I spent the last several years gathering proof. Every document inside this locker is genuine. Every recording is authentic. Every bank statement is original. I made copies because I knew the originals might disappear. I lowered the paper. Recordings. Rachel looked around the locker. Where? David pointed toward one of the plastic containers. Probably in there. I continued reading. If Michael has changed, destroy everything. No one deserves to be punished forever for old mistakes. But if he is still lying, please don't let him hurt Rachel the way he hurt me. The hallway became completely silent. No one moved. Finally, David spoke. We need to inventory every item before opening anything. It took nearly 30 minutes. The first archive box contained tax records dating back almost 12 years, perfectly organized, each folder labeled by year. The second contained copies of property deeds, insurance policies, loan agreements, canceled checks, and notarized statements. Everything had been indexed, everything cross-referenced. The third box contained personal journals, nearly 20 notebooks, one for each year. Rachel gently picked up the oldest one. Mom wrote every night. David carefully photographed each item before returning it exactly where it had been. Then we opened the first weatherproof container. Inside sat dozens of USB flash drives, each one labeled with dates. Beside them rested several digital voice recorders. Some still carried masking tape with handwritten notes. Bank meeting. Michael office phone call. Do not erase. Rachel looked horrified. My mother recorded him, David answered quietly. Apparently. The second container held photographs. Hundreds of them. Pictures of contracts, bank receipts, construction invoices, even handwritten notes. Everything had been documented. Whoever Diane had become during those final years. She had transformed herself into an investigator. Then we opened the third container. Inside lay nothing except a thick bundle of bank statements secured by a red ribbon. Across the top page, Diane had written 3 words. Start here. First, David removed the ribbon. The statements covered nearly 8 years. He scanned the first few pages, then another. His expression changed instantly. Karen. What? You need to see this. I stepped beside him. Highlighted in yellow were dozens of electronic transfers. Each originated from Diane and James's business account. Each ended in one destination, Brown and Sons Construction. The amounts started small. 8,000, 12,500, 15,000. Then they grew larger. 37,000, 61,000, 84,000. Transfer after transfer, year after year. David reached for a calculator. For nearly 5 minutes, no one spoke as he added the highlighted figures. When he finally stopped, he slowly removed his glasses. Rachel whispered, "How much?" David looked directly at both of us. At least, he checked the total one last time. $423,860. Rachel's legs nearly gave out beneath her. That's impossible. It shouldn't have existed, David replied quietly. The sewing shop never earned enough to give away nearly $500,000. I looked back at the stack of statements. One question echoed through my mind. If Michael had taken more than $423,000, how much had he stolen that Diane never managed to discover? And if these bank records were only the beginning, what could possibly be hiding inside the recordings labeled with his name? None of us spoke for several minutes. The number seemed too large to belong to our family. $423,860. It wasn't simply a series of bad decisions. It was a lifetime of savings. James and Diane had built their sewing business one customer at a time. They had worked 6 days a week for over 30 years, repairing school uniforms, hemming wedding gowns, stitching military patches, and restoring handmade quilts that had been passed down through generations. They hadn't become wealthy. They had become respected. Every dollar they earned had represented another hour sitting behind an old sewing machine. And now we knew where much of that money had gone. David carefully closed the folder. Before we make any assumptions, he said, we need to establish whether these were loans, investments, gifts, or unauthorized transfers. Rachel stared at him. Does that really matter? Legally? He nodded. Very much. But morally, he sighed. I already have my opinion. I walked toward one of Diane's journals. If she wrote everything down, maybe she answered that question herself. David agreed. Start with the oldest entries after James died. Rachel handed me a notebook labeled 2018. The pages were filled with Diane's familiar handwriting. Most entries were ordinary, customers who had visited the shop, recipes she wanted to try, weather reports, birthday reminders, little moments that would have seemed unimportant to anyone else. Then the tone changed. I found an entry dated March 18, 2018. I read aloud. Michael came by today asking for another loan. He promised it would be the last one. James looked exhausted. After Michael left, James said something that frightened me. He said, one day he won't just take our money, he'll take our peace. Rachel quietly wiped away another tear. That sounds exactly like Dad. I continued reading. A few pages later, James refused to sign another check. Michael became angry. They argued in the garage because they thought I couldn't hear. James told him he would never mortgage the shop. Michael slammed the door hard enough to crack the window. David immediately looked up. Garage. Rachel nodded. The old workshop behind the sewing shop. Is it still standing? Yes. David made a note in his notebook. We may need to inspect it later. I turned another page. Months passed between entries. Then came another. James says the construction company isn't making money. Michael insists everything is temporary. I don't know who to believe anymore. I looked toward David. He really was warning her. He absolutely was. Another entry. Karen called today. She asked whether Michael was borrowing again. I lied. I stopped reading. Rachel gently touched my shoulder. What did it say? I swallowed. It says she lied to me. Rachel lowered her eyes. My mom hated lying. I know. She probably thought she was protecting everyone. I nodded sadly, especially Michael. We continued reading for another hour. Each journal revealed another piece of the family's collapse, loan after loan, promise after promise, excuse after excuse. Then everything changed with one sentence. The entry was dated October 4th, 2020. The handwriting looked shakier than usual. Today, Ethan screamed at Michael. Rachel froze. Ethan. Her older brother hadn't been mentioned since the funeral. I continued. I have never seen Ethan so angry. He accused Michael of stealing from us. Michael laughed. Then Michael accused Ethan of taking money himself. Rachel shook her head. No. David looked at her. What is it? My brother would never steal from Mom. The journal continued. The police came. Someone reported missing business funds. Michael handed officers copies of financial records. Everything pointed toward Ethan. Rachel's breathing became uneven. No. I looked at her carefully. You never told me this. She stared at the floor. Because no one believed Ethan. What happened? He left. When? The same week. Why? Rachel closed her eyes. Everyone thought he had stolen nearly $80,000 from the business. David frowned. 80,000? He kept saying someone had changed the accounting records. What did Diane believe? Rachel answered almost immediately. She believed Ethan. Then why didn't she stop the investigation? Rachel hesitated. Because she looked ashamed. She didn't have proof. David slowly removed his glasses. So the family split apart. Rachel nodded. Mom defended Ethan. Michael defended the accounting records. The town believed Uncle Michael. And Ethan disappeared. I remembered the funeral. Michael's casual remark. Your mother also believed Ethan would come home someday. At the time, it had sounded cruel. Now it sounded calculated. I continued reading. Ethan packed one suitcase. Before leaving, he hugged me. He said, Mom, someday you'll know I didn't do this. I told him I already knew. He cried. Rachel buried her face in her hands. I haven't seen him in almost 6 years. I wrapped an arm around her shoulders. We'll find him. She looked at me with tired eyes. What if he doesn't want to be found? He deserves the truth, David quietly added. And if he was framed, he deserves much more than that. We returned to the journals. A newer notebook labeled 2022 contained even darker entries. Someone entered the shop after closing. Nothing valuable was taken. Only accounting files were disturbed. Another. Michael insists I'm imagining things. Another. Bank statements disappeared. Another. Made copies today. Never leaving originals in the office again. David looked increasingly serious. This wasn't paranoia. No. This was evidence preservation. Exactly. Diane hadn't become suspicious overnight. She had slowly realized someone was rewriting her financial history. Then Rachel noticed something tucked between 2 journal pages. A photograph. She carefully removed it. The picture showed Diane standing beside Ethan in front of the sewing shop. Both were smiling. James stood behind them with one arm around his son. Michael wasn't in the picture. Written across the back were 5 words. The last peaceful summer. Rachel quietly laughed through her tears. I remember that day. What happened? Ethan had just finished rebuilding the front porch. He wasn't a carpenter. He was studying mechanical engineering. But Dad wanted to replace the old boards. So Ethan spent 2 weekends learning how. She smiled faintly. Dad kept hammering his own thumb. Despite everything, we all laughed. Only for a moment. Then David noticed another folded paper hidden behind the photograph. It wasn't handwritten. It was printed. A bank transfer authorization. The sender, Parker Family Sewing. The recipient, Brown and Sons Construction. Amount, $79,842.16. Date. The exact same week, Ethan had been accused of stealing almost $80,000. David's eyes narrowed. Interesting. What? The amount? Rachel frowned. What about it? Ethan was accused of stealing approximately $80,000. Yes. This transfer, he tapped the page, is almost exactly the same amount. The room fell silent. David continued thinking aloud. What if there never was missing money? What if? He looked directly at me. The money wasn't stolen. It was transferred. Rachel blinked. But everyone believed Ethan emptied the account. David nodded slowly. Which means someone wanted the family to believe that. I stared at the transfer authorization. There was a signature, supposedly Diane's. David studied it carefully for nearly 30 seconds. Then he looked at me. Karen. Yes. I've reviewed Diane's signature on legal documents for over 30 years. And this signature doesn't look right. You think it's forged? I think. He leaned closer. It's an imitation. Rachel's face turned pale. You mean Uncle Michael? I mean someone created paperwork that matched the exact amount Ethan was accused of stealing. He tapped the document once more. That's not coincidence. Before anyone could respond, something echoed through the storage corridor. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, not ours. We all looked toward the open hallway outside locker 307. Someone had entered the restricted storage area. David quietly closed the journal. Rachel instinctively stepped behind me. The footsteps grew louder. One, then another. Then they stopped just outside the locker door. A shadow stretched across the concrete floor. Someone was standing there, watching us. Rachel instinctively grabbed my arm. The shadow remained motionless just outside locker 317. For several long seconds, no one spoke. David quietly stepped in front of us. Who's there? He called. The figure moved. An elderly security guard rounded the corner, carrying a flashlight and a clipboard. I'm sorry, he said with an embarrassed smile. The front office asked me to make sure everything was all right. The tension drained from the room. Rachel let out the breath she'd been holding. I thought... So did I admitted. The guard glanced toward the open locker. Quite a collection. David smiled politely. Family records. The guard nodded. I'll be at the end of the hallway if you need anything. As his footsteps disappeared, silence returned. David closed the locker door halfway. I think we've seen enough for one morning. I frowned. We've barely started. And that's exactly why we need to slow down. He pointed toward the growing stack of evidence. If these documents are genuine, we're looking at years of financial misconduct. If they're challenged in court, every piece must remain exactly where we found it. He was right. Emotion couldn't replace procedure. Not if we wanted justice. For the next 2 hours, David photographed every journal, every bank statement, every flash drive, and every handwritten note before placing each item into numbered evidence sleeves. Nothing was rushed. Nothing was overlooked. By early afternoon, we finally locked locker 3 and 17 again. I slipped the brass key back into my purse. Only then did David speak. "We need to meet at my office. Today. Immediately." David's office sat on the second floor of an old brick building overlooking Cedar Hollow's town square. The shelves were lined with legal books that looked older than I was. Family photographs covered one wall. Diplomas covered another. Rachel sat quietly near the window, while David spread copies of Diane's financial records across his conference table. For nearly an hour, none of us spoke. Only the sound of turning pages filled the room. Finally, David removed one particular document from a separate folder. "I didn't want to mention this inside the storage facility." "What is it?" "A certified copy of Diane's will." Rachel frowned. "I already know Mom's will." David looked at her carefully. "I don't think you do." He placed two documents side by side. "They're different." My stomach tightened. "Different how?" "The copy stored with the county courthouse." He tapped the document on the left. "Was signed almost 11 years ago." Then he touched the second document. "This version was filed only 6 months ago." Rachel leaned forward. "I've never seen that." "Neither have I." David adjusted his glasses. "And that's unusual." He opened the newer document. The first page appeared ordinary. Then we reached the distribution section. Rachel suddenly stood up. "No." Her voice barely rose above the whisper. "No." I looked closer. According to the new will, Michael had been appointed executor of Diane's estate. Rachel would receive a modest cash payment. The sewing shop would be sold. The family home would be sold. Nearly every remaining financial asset would be placed under Michael's authority for estate administration. "What is this?" I asked. David's face remained expressionless. "A legal disaster." Rachel shook her head repeatedly. "My mother would never do this." "I agree. She promised the shop would stay in our family." David nodded, "Which is why I obtained the earlier version this morning." He handed me the original will. It was completely different. Rachel inherited the house. The sewing shop belonged jointly to Rachel and Ethan. Several charitable donations had been included. Michael received only one specific gift: their father's old hunting rifle. Nothing else. Rachel stared at both documents. "They can't both be real." "No." David folded his hands. "Only one can be." I looked at the signatures. At first glance, they seemed identical. But after staring for several moments, I noticed subtle differences. The newer signature appeared slower, stiffer, as though someone had carefully copied each letter instead of writing naturally. David saw exactly where I was looking. "You noticed?" "I think so." He smiled slightly. "Good." He reached into another folder and removed nearly 20 pages containing Diane's signature from different years. Checks, tax forms, property records, letters. The pattern became obvious. Diane always crossed the T in Parker with one smooth stroke. The newer will use two separate strokes, tiny, almost invisible, but different. David pointed again. "That's called hesitation." Hesitation. When someone copies a signature instead of naturally writing it. Rachel whispered, "So the new will—" "I'm not saying it's forged." He paused. "I'm saying it deserves immediate forensic examination." The room became very quiet. Then David opened another envelope. "This arrived yesterday." "Yesterday." "It was delivered by courier while I was attending the funeral." He slid a typed letter across the table. It was from a law firm in Pittsburgh, representing Michael Brown. My heart sank. David began reading aloud. As acting executor of the estate of Diane Parker. Rachel interrupted immediately. He wasn't executor yesterday. David nodded. Exactly. He continued. Our client requests immediate transfer of all estate documents, banking information, property records, and business assets into his exclusive control. My jaw tightened. He wasted no time. David continued. Failure to cooperate may result in legal action. Rachel looked horrified. He already hired lawyers. Apparently. I stared at the date. The letter had been prepared 2 days before Diane's funeral. I looked back at David. That's impossible. It shouldn't be. He couldn't have known. David slowly met my eyes. Unless. Neither of us finished the sentence. Rachel did. He already knew Mom was dying. Another terrible possibility entered my mind. What if... I hesitated. What if he already knew about the new will? David answered immediately. I think he expected it to be enough. Enough for what? To end any questions. He pointed toward locker 317. But he didn't know Diane had created an entirely separate archive. Rachel suddenly remembered something. There was another envelope. What envelope? In Mom's bedroom. I found it after she died. Why didn't you mention it? I thought it was just funeral paperwork. She hurried to her purse and removed a sealed white envelope she had been carrying for days. Across the front, Diane had written only one name. David Miller. David frowned. I've never seen this. Rachel handed it to him. You'd open it. Inside was a single handwritten note. David read silently. The color slowly drained from his face. What? He looked at me. Diane left me instructions. What kind of instructions? He swallowed. If anyone ever presents a will dated after March 14th, he looked down at the paper again before continuing. Plunge it immediately. Rachel stared at him. Why March 14th? David turned the note over. Another sentence had been written beneath it. Because after that day, I never signed another legal document alone. The room fell silent. Then David slowly placed both wills side by side. I think your sister knew exactly when someone first tried to replace her estate plan. I stared at the forged signature, at Michael's legal demand, at Diane's handwritten warning. The timing wasn't accidental. Someone had started preparing to seize Diane's estate while she was still alive, and according to her own note, she had realized it. David locked both versions of Diane's will inside his office safe before any of us stood up. I don't want these leaving this building, he said. I agree, I replied. If Michael discovers we've found the earlier will, he'll know we're no longer relying on assumptions. Rachel looked from David to me. What happens now? We verify everything. David picked up one of the journals. Diane left us evidence. But evidence only becomes powerful when every piece can be independently confirmed. He paused before adding, and there's one person who may already know more than any of us. I already knew the answer. Ethan. David nodded. If he was framed, he may have been trying to tell everyone the truth years ago. Rachel stared at the floor. I've tried calling him. When? Every birthday. Every Christmas. Every Mother's Day. She forced a weak smile. The number stopped working years ago. I placed my hand over hers. We'll find him. I don't even know where to begin. David reached into a filing cabinet. I might. He removed an old client folder. When Ethan left Cedar Hollow, he asked me one question. What was it? Rachel asked. If someone destroys your reputation, how do you prove a negative? Rachel closed her eyes. That sounds like him. David nodded slowly. He wasn't angry. He was heartbroken. He kept saying someone had altered financial records. But without the original documents, no one believed him. I thought about the transfer authorization we'd found in locker 317. The amount had matched almost perfectly with the money Ethan had supposedly stolen. It no longer looked like coincidence. It looked like planning. David continued searching through the file until he found a yellow sticky note attached to the inside cover. I forgot about this. What is it? He left a forwarding address. Rachel leaned forward. You have it. Not exactly. David frowned. It's almost 6 years old. Where? Columbus, Ohio. Rachel's eyes brightened for the first time in days. That's something. It may not still be valid. It doesn't matter, she said. It's a place to start. By late afternoon, we were driving west. The 3-hour trip felt strangely familiar. Rachel spent most of the journey looking through old family photographs she'd found in Diane's journals. One picture showed Ethan teaching her how to ride a bicycle. Another showed him carrying her on his shoulders during the town's 4th of July parade. He practically raised me, she whispered. What was he like? I asked. She smiled faintly. The opposite of Uncle Michael. In what way? He couldn't lie. Not even little lies. When he broke Mom's favorite vase as a teenager, he confessed before anyone noticed. She laughed softly. Mom grounded him anyway. But she hugged him first. The laughter disappeared almost as quickly as it had come. I still remember the day he left. She looked out the passenger window. The whole town thought he was a thief. People crossed the street to avoid him. Our neighbors stopped coming to the shop. Mom cried every night, and Uncle Michael kept saying, her voice became bitter. Sometimes family disappoints us. David, who was driving quietly, shook his head. I've practiced law for 42 years. The most dangerous lies aren't the loud ones. They're the ones repeated calmly until everyone mistakes them for facts. None of us disagreed. The address led us to a modest apartment building on the outskirts of Columbus. It wasn't new, but it was clean. Rachel's hands trembled as we climbed the front steps. Apartment 204. She knocked gently. Nothing. She knocked again. Still nothing. An elderly woman opened the neighboring door. Can I help you? David smiled politely. We're looking for Ethan Parker. The woman looked thoughtful. Oh, he moved. Rachel's shoulders dropped. When? Almost 3 years ago. Do you know where? She smiled kindly. He bought a little house. Rachel's eyes widened. He bought a house? Yes. He worked very hard. What did he do? He designs industrial equipment, mechanical engineering. Exactly what Rachel had said he had studied. The woman disappeared inside her apartment and returned carrying a small notepad. I think I still have his Christmas card. She flipped through several pages before finding it. There. She pointed toward an address written neatly beneath Ethan's name. It's only about 20 minutes from here. Rachel's eyes immediately filled with tears. Thank you. The woman smiled warmly. He was one of the nicest young men who ever lived here. He always carried groceries for me. He fixed my mailbox without charging anything. He even shoveled snow from the parking lot after every storm. She looked genuinely puzzled. I always wondered why someone like him looked so lonely. None of us answered, because we already knew. The small house sat at the end of a quiet residential street. A vegetable garden filled the backyard. Wind chimes hung from the porch. An old pickup truck rested in the driveway. Everything about the place felt peaceful. Rachel stopped walking. I don't know if I can do this. You can. What if he hates us? I looked into her eyes. If he loved your mother, he won't hate you. She slowly climbed the porch steps, then knocked. Footsteps approached from inside. The door opened. For several seconds, no one moved. The man standing before us looked older than I remembered. His dark hair had begun turning gray at the temples. There were faint lines around his eyes, but they were the same gentle eyes James had carried his entire life. Rachel whispered only one word. Ethan. He stared at her in complete disbelief. Rachel. The grocery bag he had been holding slipped from his hands. Apples rolled across the porch. Neither of them noticed. Rachel burst into tears. Before she could speak again, Ethan wrapped both arms around his little sister. They stood there crying together for what felt like forever. When they finally stepped apart, Ethan looked at me. Aunt Karen. He smiled sadly. I wasn't sure I'd ever see family again. I walked forward and hugged him tightly. I'm sorry. So am I. David quietly remained near the steps, allowing the reunion to happen. After a few minutes, Ethan invited us inside. His home was simple. Bookshelves lined one wall. Engineering drawings covered a work table. Family photographs were almost nowhere to be seen. Only one picture remained. Diane, standing outside the sewing shop. Ethan noticed me looking. I couldn't throw that one away. Rachel sat beside him on the couch. Mom never stopped believing you. His expression changed instantly. What? I reached into my bag and carefully removed one of Diane's journals. She wrote about you. He stared at the notebook as though he couldn't breathe. She wrote about me every year. I opened to the page describing the day he left Cedar Hollow. Without speaking, I handed it to him. He read silently. Halfway down the page, tears began falling onto the paper. When he finished, he carefully closed the journal and held it against his chest. I knew she believed me. His voice cracked. He struggled to continue. Didn't know she wrote it down. Rachel reached for his hand. She never stopped waiting for you. For a long moment, Ethan said nothing. Then he looked directly at David. You didn't drive 3 hours just to tell me Mom loved me. No, David answered honestly. We came because your mother left evidence. Ethan's eyes narrowed. What kind of evidence? I looked at him carefully. The kind that may finally prove you never stole a single dollar. The room became completely silent. Ethan slowly leaned back in his chair. Then he spoke the sentence I never expected to hear. I've been waiting 6 years for someone to say those words. He stood up, walked to a locked cabinet in the corner of the room, and removed a thick manila envelope. When he returned, he placed it on the coffee table. I kept every copy. Rachel frowned. Copies of what? Ethan looked directly at me. The accounting records Uncle Michael didn't know I made before he changed everything. No one spoke. Then Ethan quietly added, because I knew someday someone would finally come looking for the truth. For several seconds, none of us touched the envelope. It sat on Ethan's coffee table like something fragile enough to shatter our entire understanding of the past. Finally, David spoke. Ethan, before we open this, I need you to answer one question. Anything. Did you make these copies before or after you were accused of stealing from your mother? Before. David's eyebrows rose. You're certain? Ethan nodded. I started making copies about 3 months earlier. Why? Ethan leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on the envelope. Because I caught Uncle Michael changing numbers. Rachel gasped. What? I didn't know exactly what he was doing. I only knew the bookkeeping software showed one balance on the screen, and a different balance after he left. David leaned forward. Did you confront him? Once? What happened? Ethan gave a bitter laugh. He smiled. And then he asked whether I understood accounting. I told him I understood enough to know money was disappearing. What did he say? He told me not to accuse successful people simply because I wasn't one. Rachel shook her head in disbelief. He actually said that. Ethan nodded. I didn't tell Mom. Why not? I asked, because she always defended him. His answer hurt because it was true. I thought if I gathered enough evidence first, she'd finally believe me. He slowly opened the manila envelope. Inside were dozens of printed spreadsheets, bank reconciliation reports, copies of electronic transfers, payroll summaries. Every page had handwritten notes in the margins. David carefully examined the first few documents, then another, then another. Finally, he looked up. These aren't random copies. No, they're snapshots. Ethan nodded. I printed the books before Michael updated them. And after. David immediately understood. So, you have two different versions. Exactly. The room fell silent. If the records were genuine, they could show exactly when transactions had been altered. David compared 2 pages dated the same day. The first report listed the sewing shop's account balance as $186, $412.97. The second, printed less than an hour later, showed $106. Nearly $80,000 had disappeared. But something else had changed. The transfer description. David tapped the page. Here. Rachel leaned closer. What? The first report shows a transfer to Brown & Sons Construction. The second report, he turned the page toward us, shows a cash withdrawal authorized by Ethan Parker. Rachel covered her mouth. Oh my God. Ethan looked at me. That's how they framed me. They didn't steal the money twice. They changed the destination. David's face had become unreadable. If these timestamps are authentic, they are. Then someone deliberately altered the accounting records. Ethan quietly nodded. I tried telling the police. They said computer records don't lie. He smiled sadly. But computers only tell the truth humans leave inside them. No one argued. For the next 2 hours, we compared Ethan's copies with Diane's evidence from locker 317. Everything matched. Dates, dollar amounts, account numbers, even handwritten notes. It was as though 2 people working independently years apart had unknowingly built the same case. David finally pushed his chair back. I've seen enough. You believe him? Rachel asked. I believe the documents. And they tell a very clear story. Ethan looked exhausted. So what now? David answered without hesitation. Now we prove who changed the records. Ethan hesitated. I might know where. We all looked at him. What do you mean? He stood and walked toward a bookshelf. From the top shelf, he removed a faded photograph of the old sewing shop. He pointed toward the back of the building. Behind the workshop. Rachel frowned. The storage room. No. There was another room. I searched my memory. There wasn't. There was. Ethan smiled faintly. Grandpa built it during the 1960s. It wasn't on the blueprints. Why? He survived 2 robberies. So he created a hidden records room beneath the workshop floor. Rachel's eyes widened. I never knew that. Very few people did. Dad showed me when I turned 18. He said every family business needed one place where important papers couldn't disappear. David immediately became interested. Did Diane know about it? Yes. So did Dad. What about Michael? Ethan's expression hardened. He was never told. A silence filled the room. Then Rachel slowly whispered, You think Mom used it? Ethan nodded. If she ever realized someone was changing financial records, that's exactly where she'd hide the originals. I felt my pulse quicken. Locker 317 had contained copies. What if the hidden room contained the originals? David looked at his watch. We leave now. By early evening, we arrived back in Cedar Hollow. The sewing shop stood exactly as I remembered it. The old painted sign still hung above the entrance. Parker Family Sewing Dust covered the display windows. A handwritten notice remained taped to the inside of the glass. Closed until further notice. Rachel unlocked the front door. The familiar scent of fabric cedar and machine oil still lingered in the air. Nothing had changed. Everything had changed. Ethan slowly walked through the shop. His fingers brushed across one of the old sewing machines. Mom refused to replace this one. She said newer machines stitched faster. But this one stitched with heart. Rachel smiled through fresh tears. I can still hear it. The silence that followed seemed almost sacred. Then Ethan walked toward the rear workshop. The room was exactly as I remembered. Large cutting tables, shelves filled with thread, old dress forms standing quietly in the corners. He stopped beside an oversized workbench. Help me. The four of us pushed the heavy bench several feet across the wooden floor. Nothing. Then Ethan knelt beside one particular floorboard. It should be. He tapped twice. A hollow sound answered. There. Using the claw end of an old hammer, he carefully lifted one weathered plank. Beneath it sat a rusted iron ring. Rachel whispered, I've never seen that. Ethan pulled upward. A square wooden hatch slowly rose from the floor. Cold air drifted upward from the darkness below. A narrow staircase disappeared beneath the building. David switched on a flashlight. I'll go first. We descended one by one. The room below was no larger than a bedroom. Concrete walls, metal shelves, old filing cabinets. Everything covered by a thin layer of dust. Yet one thing stood out immediately. Someone had been there recently. A single footprint marked the dusty floor. Fresh enough that the edges remained sharp. David crouched beside it. This isn't old. Rachel's voice trembled. You mean someone entered this room? Recently. Ethan slowly swept his flashlight across the shelves. Then he froze. The cabinet. What about it? I asked. The bottom drawer. It should be locked. Instead, it hung slightly open. David carefully pulled the drawer all the way out. Empty. Every folder that should have been inside was gone. Rachel stared in disbelief. No. Ethan looked absolutely devastated. This is where Dad kept the original ledgers. David examined the lock. It wasn't forced. What does that mean? It means, he looked directly at Ethan. Whoever came here had a key. Before anyone could respond, I noticed something lying beneath the empty drawer. A tiny folded piece of paper, half hidden under years of dust. I carefully picked it up. Across the front, written in Diane's handwriting, were just 4 words. Too late. Try video. David looked at me. Video. Ethan's face suddenly turned pale. The security camera. Rachel frowned. What security camera? Ethan stared toward the ceiling above us. Dad installed one years ago, but it wasn't connected to the shop. It recorded. He swallowed hard. Everything inside this hidden room. The four of us looked at one another in stunned silence. If the original ledgers had been stolen, then somewhere there might still be a recording showing exactly who had taken them. For several long moments, none of us moved. The words on Diane's note echoed in my mind. Too late. Try video. David carefully folded the note and slipped it into a protective evidence sleeve. If Diane left this here, he said quietly, she discovered the theft before she died. Ethan nodded. Which means Mom knew someone had already emptied this room. Rachel looked around the underground storage area. But if they took the ledgers, why leave the note? I answered before anyone else could. Because she expected someone else to come after her. David looked at me and slowly nodded. Exactly. Diane hadn't written the message for herself. She had written it for whoever reached the room after she was gone. For me. Ethan climbed a small wooden ladder and examined the ceiling. There. He pointed toward an old security camera tucked into the corner where two concrete beams met. It was dusty, outdated, almost invisible. Rachel frowned. I've never noticed that before. It wasn't meant to be noticed, Ethan replied. Dad disguised it during the renovation. David shined his flashlight toward the wiring. The cable's been cut. My heart sank. So the footage is gone. Not necessarily. Ethan shook his head. This wasn't connected to the internet. It recorded onto local storage. A hard drive. No. He smiled faintly. My dad didn't trust hard drives. They fail. What did he use? Ethan looked toward an old wooden cabinet against the far wall. If he never changed the system, a removable USB drive. We hurried across the room. The cabinet looked ordinary enough, but Ethan immediately noticed something strange. The screws. What about them? Rachel asked. They've been replaced. David crouched beside the cabinet. He's right. The originals would have been flathead. These are Phillips. Someone opened this. Using a multi-tool from his pocket, Ethan carefully removed the 4 screws. The wooden panel came loose. Inside sat a small metal recording unit no larger than a lunchbox. Dust covered every surface except one. The USB port. It had been touched recently. Rachel whispered, "Is it empty?" Ethan pressed the release button. Nothing happened. He tried again. Still nothing. Someone already removed it. Disappointment swept across the room. David inspected the recorder. Wait. He pointed toward the back of the unit. There are scratches. Ethan leaned closer. The housing moved. What do you mean? This compartment opens farther than it should. He pulled gently. A second panel slid outward. Hidden behind the main compartment was another USB slot. Smaller, completely concealed. Something was still inside. A tiny black flash drive. No label, no markings. Just enough dust around it to prove it hadn't been removed in years. Rachel gasped. Oh my God. Ethan carefully pulled it free. David smiled for the first time all day. I think your father planned for thieves. We carried the USB upstairs into the sewing shop. No one wanted to risk damaging it. David connected his laptop to a portable battery pack before inserting the drive. The computer recognized it immediately. One folder appeared. Archive inside were dozens of video files, each named only by date. The earliest recording was almost 7 years old. The newest, only 3 weeks before Diane's death. Rachel covered her mouth. Mom kept recording. David clicked the most recent file. The screen remained black for several seconds. Then the hidden room appeared. The camera angle overlooked the filing cabinets from the ceiling. There was no sound for nearly a minute. Then footsteps echoed through the room. A woman entered. Diane. She looked thinner than I remembered. Cancer had already taken much of her strength. She carried 2 large archive boxes. Without speaking, she placed them inside the bottom filing cabinet. Then she looked directly toward the hidden camera, as though she knew exactly where it was. She smiled sadly. Rachel began crying immediately. "Mom!" On the screen, Diane adjusted a stack of folders before speaking. Her voice filled the quiet sewing shop. "If you're watching this," she paused, "then something has gone wrong." David immediately began recording the playback with his phone. Diane continued. "I hope Karen is standing there." My breath caught. "I hope Rachel is safe." Another pause. "And I hope Ethan has finally come home." Rachel buried her face in her hands. Ethan couldn't look away from the screen. Diane smiled gently. "If all 3 of you are together, then perhaps we still have a chance." She looked down at the folders. "I've hidden copies elsewhere, but the originals stay here. If Michael ever finds this room, he'll think taking these papers ends the story." She shook her head. "It doesn't." She reached into her pocket and held up another object. A silver USB drive. "This is the real evidence." Every one of us leaned closer. Diane continued. "The financial records prove money disappeared." "But this?" She looked directly into the camera again. "Proves who took it." The video ended. The room became completely silent. Rachel whispered, "Where is it?" David frowned. "She wasn't holding the drive we just found." "No," Ethan agreed. "Different color, different size, different shape." I reopened the folder. There were more recordings, much more. David selected another file. This one was dated days later. Again, the hidden room appeared. Again, Diane entered, carrying documents. But this time, she wasn't alone. Another person followed her down the stairs. We couldn't see the face immediately, only polished brown shoes, dark trousers. Then the figure stepped fully into view. Patricia, Michael's wife. Rachel stared at the screen in disbelief. "Aunt Patricia!" Patricia looked nervous. She kept glancing toward the staircase. Diane closed the hatch above them before speaking. Although the microphone wasn't perfect, every word was understandable. "I don't have much time." Patricia nodded anxiously. "I know." "I can't keep lying for him anymore." Rachel gasped. David immediately increased the volume. Patricia's hands were shaking. "I brought everything." She placed a large envelope on the table. Diane slowly opened it. Inside were photocopies of bank records, loan agreements, emails, and several photographs. Patricia looked close to tears. "I didn't know how bad it had become." Diane quietly reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You do now." Patricia nodded. "I found another account." "What account?" Diane asked. "The one Michael never told anyone about." She pulled out another sheet of paper. "He moved money through this account before transferring it into the construction company." David suddenly paused the video. His expression had completely changed. "What is it?" I asked. He pointed toward the frozen frame. "Zoom in." Ethan enlarged the document Patricia had placed on the table. The image became grainy, but one detail remained perfectly readable. The account holder's name. Brown Holdings, LLC. David slowly leaned back. "I've never heard of that company." Neither had I. Rachel shook her head. Dad never mentioned it. Ethan frowned. It wasn't part of Brown and Sons. David's voice became very quiet. I don't think it was supposed to be. He looked directly at me. I think we've just discovered where the money actually went. Before anyone could speak again, Ethan clicked on the final recording. The timestamp showed it had been made only 4 days before Diane died. The screen flickered. The hidden room appeared once more. Then, the hatch above slowly opened. Someone climbed down the stairs. Not Diane, not Patricia. The figure carried a flashlight, and as he stepped into the light, every one of us recognized him. Michael. No one breathed. The video had frozen on Michael's face. He wasn't wearing a business suit. He wasn't dressed for a funeral. He wore dark jeans, black gloves, and a hooded jacket. He hadn't come to organize family records. I had come to hide something. Ethan clicked play. Michael slowly closed the hatch behind him and stood perfectly still for several seconds, sweeping the room with his flashlight. He knew exactly where the hidden room was, Rachel whispered. So much for never being told, David replied. Michael walked directly toward the filing cabinet. Not a single moment of hesitation. No searching, no confusion. He knew precisely what he wanted. He unlocked the bottom drawer with a small silver key. Rachel looked at Ethan. That wasn't Grandpa's key. No. Dad kept the original. David folded his arms. Then Michael either made a duplicate or someone gave him one. On the screen, Michael removed the thick ledgers one by one, placing them into 2 cardboard archive boxes. He worked quickly, methodically, almost professionally. Then something unexpected happened. He stopped. His flashlight landed on Diane's handwritten note, the one we had found beneath the empty drawer. He picked it up, read it, smiled, then placed it back beneath the cabinet. Rachel stared in disbelief. He left it. On purpose, I said. David nodded. He wanted Diane to know he'd already been there. The smile on Michael's face chilled me more than anything else in the recording. It wasn't the smile of someone stealing. It was the smile of someone who believed he had already won. Then Michael spoke. His voice was faint, but clear enough. Diane. He looked around the empty room. You always were one step behind. He picked up the archive boxes and walked toward the stairs. Just before leaving, he turned back. I hope Karen never finds what you're hiding. The screen went black. Silence filled the sewing shop. David immediately copied the video onto 3 separate encrypted drives. This alone changes everything, he said. Rachel looked confused. It proves he took the ledgers. It proves much more than that. David looked directly at her. It proves he lied. He claimed he knew nothing about any hidden records. Now we have him removing those records himself. I stared at the frozen image of Michael. For years, he had convinced everyone that he was cleaning up other people's mistakes. Now we had watched him creating them. We spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing every remaining video. Some recordings showed Diane organizing evidence. Others showed Ethan helping James repair shelves years before the family fell apart. Then one particular file caught David's attention. Its title wasn't a date. It simply read, "Do not delete." He opened it. The camera activated. Again, the hidden room appeared. This recording was shorter, only 6 minutes. Diane entered carrying a small recorder. She looked directly into the camera. If you're watching this, then Michael has probably taken the ledgers, Rachel whispered. She knew. Diane continued. I expected that. She held up a folded sheet of paper. I also know he'll overlook one thing. She smiled sadly. He never pays attention to people. He only pays attention to money. David leaned closer to the screen. What does she mean? Diane answered almost immediately. I gave copies to someone he stopped noticing years ago. Rachel frowned. Who? The recording ended before she answered. The room erupted with questions. Who was she talking about? Rachel asked. Ethan slowly shook his head. I don't know. I searched my memory. Michael had spent years focusing on banks' loans, construction contracts, and legal documents. Who had become invisible to him? The shop assistant, an old customer. A neighbor? David remained unusually quiet. He replayed the sentence 3 times. I gave copies to someone he stopped noticing years ago. Finally, he looked at me. I think I know. Who? Patricia. Rachel blinked. My aunt. David nodded. Think about it. For years, Michael treated her as though she simply followed him. No one ever imagined she'd question him. Ethan remembered something. She brought documents to Mom. Exactly. What if she kept another set? The possibility sent a wave of hope through the room. If Patricia still has evidence, David smiled slightly. Then Michael's biggest mistake wasn't stealing money. It was assuming his own wife would stay silent forever. That evening, we returned to Diane's house. None of us noticed the black sedan parked across the street. Not until Rachel looked through the living room curtains. Karen. I walked over. What is it? She pointed toward the parked car. Has that been there long? David stepped beside us. The windows were tinted. The engine was off. But someone sat behind the steering wheel, watching. Ethan quietly closed the curtains. Don't go outside. David immediately called the Cedar Hollow Police Department. An officer arrived 20 minutes later. By then, the sedan was gone. The responding officer took our statements politely but seemed unconvinced. Could have been anyone. David handed him a copy of the security video showing Michael removing the ledgers. The officer watched carefully. His expression changed. I'll be honest. This is significant. Will you investigate? Rachel asked. He hesitated. I'll submit it. It wasn't the answer any of us wanted. After he left, David sighed. Civil cases move slowly. What about criminal charges? Ethan asked. They move even slower. So we wait. No. David shook his head. We prepare. The next morning began with another surprise. A courier arrived carrying a large certified envelope. It was addressed to Rachel. Inside was a formal legal notice. David read it twice before looking up. Michael filed a petition. Rachel's face turned pale. For what? Immediate authority to remove you from Diane's house. What? He claims the property belongs to the estate, and that you're interfering with its administration. Rachel sat down heavily. He wants to evict me. Yes. And he requested an emergency hearing. When? David checked the court stamp. 48 hours. The room fell silent. 48 hours. That was all the time we had before Michael tried to take the house legally. David carefully placed the notice beside Diane's original will. He thinks we're unprepared. I looked at the growing stack of evidence covering the dining room table. The journals, the bank records, the videos, the forged signatures, Ethan's accounting files, the footage from the hidden room. I slowly shook my head. No. Rachel looked at me. What? I closed the folder in front of me. For the first time in years, he's the one who has no idea what we're bringing into that courtroom. And somewhere deep inside, I had the unmistakable feeling that Diane had planned even this. because she had spent years preparing for the day Michael would finally believe he had already won. The county courthouse in Cedar Hollow looked exactly as it had when I served on jury duty nearly 20 years earlier. Red brick, white columns, and American flag waving gently above the front entrance. On any other morning, people would have walked through those doors thinking about traffic tickets, property disputes, or marriage licenses. Today, my family was walking in to fight for the truth. Rachel barely touched the cup of coffee she'd brought with her. Ethan adjusted his tie for what must have been the 10th time. David carried 2 leather briefcases so heavy that I offered to help. He smiled. If everything in these bags becomes evidence, they're the most valuable briefcases I've ever carried. None of us laughed. Inside courtroom 2, Michael was already waiting. He looked completely different from the man we'd seen sneaking into the hidden room. Today, he wore an expensive charcoal gray suit. His hair was neatly combed. His expression was calm, confident. Beside him sat 2 attorneys from Pittsburgh. Both wore tailored suits and organized thick binders across their table. Michael glanced toward us. For just a moment, our eyes met. Then he smiled. It was the same smile he'd worn his entire life whenever he believed he controlled the outcome. Rachel whispered, "He thinks he's going to win." David quietly replied, "He hasn't seen our evidence yet." Judge Eleanor Watkins entered precisely at 9 o'clock. Everyone stood. After the formal introductions, Michael's attorney rose first. "Your Honor," he began smoothly, "this is a straightforward probate matter. Our client is the lawful executor of the estate of Diane Parker. The estate contains substantial debt. The residence must therefore be secured immediately." He gestured toward Rachel. "Miss Parker refuses to vacate the property." The judge turned toward David. "Your response." David stood slowly. "Your Honor, this case is anything but straightforward." He placed 2 sealed folders on the evidence table. "We challenge both the validity of the executor appointment and the authenticity of the will upon which it relies." For the first time that morning, Michael stopped smiling. His attorney frowned. "On what grounds?" David opened the first folder. "Forgery." The courtroom became completely silent. Judge Watkins adjusted her glasses. "That is a serious allegation, Mr. Miller." "It is, and we are prepared to support it." Michael leaned toward his attorney and whispered something urgently. His confidence had begun to crack. David approached the witness stand carrying both versions of Diane's will. "Your Honor, I request permission to submit 2 testamentary documents for comparison." The judge nodded. "Granted." She carefully reviewed each document. "They appear similar." "They do." David pointed toward the signatures. "I asked the court to note the differences in execution." Judge Watkins examined them more closely. "I see slight variations," David continued. "We also possess a handwritten instruction from Diane Parker, directing me to challenge any will dated after March 14th. Michael's attorney immediately stood. "Objection." "Hearsay." David remained calm. "The instruction is accompanied by independent documentary evidence and predates this litigation." The judge considered the objection. "Overruled." Michael shifted uneasily in his chair. David then called his first witness, Rachel. She walked to the stand with trembling hands. After taking the oath, David spoke gently. "Rachel, did your mother ever tell you she intended to leave her home to Michael Brown?" "No." "Did she ever discuss selling the sewing shop?" "Never." "What did she tell you?" Rachel looked toward the judge. "My mom always said, the house belonged to our family, and the shop belonged to both me and my brother." David nodded. "Did your mother trust the defendant with her finances?" Rachel hesitated. "At first. And later, She looked toward Michael. No. Michael stared back without expression. David continued. Why? Rachel swallowed. Because she started crying after he visited. The courtroom became noticeably quieter. What do you mean? He brought papers for her to sign. He always asked me to leave the room. When he left, Mom usually cried. Michael's attorney immediately rose. Objection. Speculation. Judge Watkins looked toward Rachel. Did your mother explain why she cried? Rachel lowered her eyes. No. The judge nodded. The statement will be admitted only as an observation, not as evidence of motive. David accepted the ruling. That wasn't the point he wanted to make anyway. Next came Ethan. As he walked toward the witness stand, whispers spread through the courtroom gallery. Many people in Cedar Hollow still remembered the accusations against him. Judge Watkins waited until the room became quiet again. David began. Please state your name. Ethan James Parker. Were you once accused of stealing business funds from Parker Family Sewing? Yes. Did you steal those funds? No. Michael's attorney smiled. Of course he says that. David ignored him. What happened after the accusation? I left town. Why? Because no one believed me. David placed 2 accounting reports before Ethan. Do you recognize these? Yes. What are they? 2 copies of the business accounting records, printed less than 1 hour apart. David handed both reports to the judge. Please describe the difference. Ethan pointed toward the highlighted transactions. The first report shows a transfer from the sewing business to Brown & Sons Construction. The second report, he paused, shows the same money listed as cash stolen by me. A murmur swept across the courtroom. Judge Watkins leaned forward. You are saying the records changed? Yes, Your Honor. Who changed them? I don't know. But I know I didn't. Michael suddenly stood. That's a lie. His attorney immediately pulled him back into his chair. The judge looked directly at Michael. Mr. Brown, you will remain seated. If you interrupt these proceedings again, I will hold you in contempt. Michael slowly sat down. For the first time, I saw genuine panic in his eyes. During a short recess, David gathered us in the courthouse hallway. So far, so good. He shook his head. So far, we've only opened the door. Rachel frowned. What do you mean? We've challenged the will. We've questioned the accounting. But we still haven't directly connected Michael to the missing money. Ethan nodded. We need something stronger. David looked toward his briefcase. We have something stronger. The security video. Yes. But I'm saving it. When? He smiled slightly. When Michael believes the hearing is almost over. I frowned. Why wait? Because people reveal more when they think they're winning. The afternoon session began. Michael's attorney called him to the witness stand. He walked confidently toward the chair, placed his hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, then sat down. His attorney smiled. Mr. Brown, did your sister trust you completely? Did she appoint you executor willingly? Yes. Did you ever take money from her business without permission? Absolutely not. Were you ever inside a hidden records room beneath the sewing shop? Michael didn't hesitate. No. Not even for a second. David didn't react. He simply wrote one word across the top of his legal pad. Committed. I leaned closer. What does that mean? Without looking up, David whispered. It means he just locked himself into a lie. Then he quietly reached into his briefcase. Inside was a USB drive labeled only with today's date. The very same recording that showed Michael entering the hidden room. And in just a few minutes, the entire courtroom was going to watch it. The courtroom settled into complete silence as Michael remained in the witness chair. He looked confident again, perhaps too confident. His attorney had guided him carefully through every answer. He insisted Diane had trusted him. He insisted every financial decision had been made with her approval. And most importantly, he had just testified under oath that he had never entered the hidden records room beneath the sewing shop. David quietly stood. "Your Honor, I'd like permission to begin my cross-examination." Judge Watkins nodded. "You may proceed." David approached the witness stand without carrying a single document. That immediately caught my attention. He wanted Michael to relax. "Mr. Brown," David began pleasantly, "how long have you lived in Cedar Hollow?" "My entire life." "You were close to your sister Diane." "Very." "You helped manage her affairs after your brother-in-law passed away." "Yes." "You visited her often." "Whenever she needed me." "So, you were familiar with the sewing shop?" "Of course." "The workshop in the back?" "Yes." "The storage areas?" "Generally." David smiled politely. "But you testified a few moments ago that you never entered a hidden records room beneath the workshop." Michael answered immediately. "Because I never did." David nodded. "No further questions on that point." Michael looked relieved. I knew David well enough to recognize the trap. He had no intention of arguing. He intended to prove. David returned to counsel table and lifted a small black flash drive. "This exhibit has already been authenticated through chain of custody." Michael frowned. His attorney looked uncertain. David continued. "It contains surveillance footage recovered from a concealed security camera installed beneath Parker Family Sewing." Michael's face changed almost imperceptibly, only for a second, but I saw it. So did David. "Your Honor, we request permission to publish Exhibit 27. Judge Watkins looked toward Michael's attorney. "Objection." The attorney hesitated. "May we first review the recording?" "You may." The courtroom clerk handed him a laptop. For nearly 2 minutes, he watched silently. His expression slowly collapsed. He leaned toward Michael. "What is this?" Michael whispered something I couldn't hear. The attorney stared at him. "You told me," Michael interrupted quietly. "I didn't know about this." The attorney closed the laptop very slowly, then stood. "No objection, Your Honor." A wave of whispers spread through the courtroom. David connected the laptop to the courtroom monitor. The large screen flickered. Then the hidden room appeared. The timestamp in the upper corner showed it had been recorded 4 days before Diane's death. Everyone watched. Michael entered. The room became so quiet I could hear someone breathing behind me. On screen, Michael unlocked the filing cabinet, removed the original ledgers, read Diane's handwritten note, smiled, then clearly said, "Diane, you always were one step behind." Several jurors weren't present because this was a probate hearing, but everyone in the courtroom reacted the same way. Shock. Judge Watkins leaned forward. Michael stared at the floor. The video continued. "I hope Karen never finds what you're hiding." Then he carried the evidence upstairs. The recording ended. No one spoke. Judge Watkins removed her glasses. She looked directly at Michael. "Mr. Brown, you testified under oath that you had never entered that room." Michael swallowed. David spoke quietly. "Were you mistaken?" Michael looked toward his attorney. The attorney didn't move, didn't speak, didn't help. Michael tried again. "I remembered after I testified." A few people in the gallery laughed nervously. Judge Watkins did not. You remembered? Yes. I forgot. David waited exactly 3 seconds, then asked, You forgot removing years of your sister's business records. Michael didn't answer. David continued. You also forgot reading her note. Silence. You forgot telling her she was 1 step behind. Silence. You forgot hoping Karen would never discover what she was hiding. Silence. Judge Watkins finally intervened. Mr. Brown, you are ordered to answer. Michael's voice barely rose above a whisper. Yes. The word echoed through the courtroom. David nodded once. No further questions regarding the recording. Michael's attorney immediately requested a recess. Judge Watkins granted 15 minutes. Outside the courtroom, reporters had already begun gathering. Word spread through the courthouse faster than any of us expected. Rachel looked at David. Is it over? He shook his head. No. We've proven he lied. We still need to prove where the money went. Ethan frowned. What about Brown Holdings, LLC? David nodded. We're getting there. Just then, his phone vibrated. He answered. David Miller? His expression changed. What? He turned away from us. I understand. I'll be there. When he hung up, I immediately asked, What happened? He looked unusually serious. Someone walked into my office. When? About 20 minutes ago. Who? A woman. Rachel's eyes widened. Who was it? David answered quietly. Patricia Brown. Michael's wife. None of us spoke. David continued. My receptionist said she was terrified. Did she leave? No. She left a package. What kind of package? A sealed envelope. Did she say anything? David nodded slowly. Only 1 sentence. What was it? He looked directly at all 3 of us. She said, he paused. Tell Karen I'm done protecting him. Court resumed 30 minutes later. Before proceedings continued, David requested permission to submit newly received evidence. Michael's attorney immediately objected. We haven't reviewed it. Judge Watkins looked toward David. What is the nature of this evidence? David held up the sealed envelope. It appears to contain financial documents voluntarily provided by Patricia Brown. Michael's head snapped toward him. For the first time all day, he looked genuinely terrified. Judge Watkins considered the request. I will allow submission provisionally. The court will determine admissibility after review. David carefully opened the envelope. Inside were dozens of papers, bank statements, corporate filings, loan documents, and 1 small silver flash drive. David froze. Rachel whispered, another USB. He nodded slowly, then removed a folded hand-written note resting beneath it. The handwriting wasn't Diane's. It belonged to Patricia. David quietly read the note before handing it to me. It said only, the truth isn't in the bank records. Watch the meeting. I looked toward the silver USB drive, then back at David. What meeting? He slowly inserted the drive into the courtroom laptop. 1 video file appeared. Its title contained only a date. May 14th, private conference. David clicked play. The screen remained black for several seconds. Then the picture appeared. A conference room. A long wooden table. Michael sat at one end. Across from him, a bank manager. Between them, stacks of financial documents. The camera angle suggested someone had secretly recorded the meeting. No one in the courtroom moved. Then Michael began speaking. Once Diane signs these, he tapped the papers. Everything becomes legal. Rachel grabbed my hand so tightly it hurt. On screen, the bank manager frowned. And if she refuses? Michael smiled. She won't. She trusts me. The recording continued. Then came the sentence that made every person in the courtroom freeze. If necessary, Michael said calmly. Sign for her. The video stopped. The courtroom exploded with shocked whispers. Judge Watkins struck her gavel repeatedly. Order. Order in the courtroom. David slowly turned toward Michael. He didn't ask another question. He didn't need to, because for the first time since Diane died, Michael wasn't merely suspected of fraud. The courtroom had just watched him describe exactly how he intended to commit it. The courtroom was silent, not the ordinary silence that followed an objection or a difficult question. This was different. It was the silence of people realizing they had just witnessed the collapse of a carefully constructed lie. Judge Watkins looked from the frozen image on the courtroom monitor to Michael. Mr. Brown? Did you make the statement we have just heard? Michael's attorney stood immediately. Your Honor, I advise my client not to answer pending further review of the recording. The judge nodded. He has that right. Michael remained motionless. For the first time in his life, silence could not protect him. David quietly disconnected the USB drive. We have one final witness, Your Honor. Michael looked up sharply. His attorney frowned. Who? David answered calmly. Patricia Brown. Michael's face lost every trace of color. The courtroom doors opened. Patricia walked inside slowly. She looked exhausted. Years of quiet compromise seemed to weigh on her shoulders. She avoided looking at Michael. Instead, she walked directly toward the witness stand. Michael whispered hoarsely, Patricia. She didn't respond. After taking the oath, she folded her trembling hands together. David approached gently. Mrs. Brown, how long have you been married to Michael Brown? 32 years. Do you still love him? The question surprised everyone. Patricia closed her eyes for a moment. I love the man I married. She opened them again. I don't recognize the man sitting over there. Michael lowered his head. David continued. Mrs. Brown, did you voluntarily provide documents to this court? Yes. Why? Her voice broke. Because Diane deserved better. Rachel quietly began crying. Patricia noticed her. I'm sorry. I should have spoken years ago. Rachel whispered. My mom never blamed you. Patricia covered her mouth as tears filled her eyes. I know. That's what made it even harder. David placed the corporate records from Brown Holdings LLC onto the witness stand. Have you seen these before? Yes. What is Brown Holdings? Patricia answered without hesitation. A shell company. A murmur swept through this courtroom. David asked, Who created it? My husband. For what purpose? To move money. From where? From Parker Family Sewing. And after that, into Brown and Sons Construction. She looked directly at Judge Watkins. So no one would know where it really came from. Michael suddenly stood. She's lying. Judge Watkins struck her gavel. Sit down immediately. Michael ignored her. She doesn't understand our finances. Patricia slowly turned toward him for the first time that day. No. Her voice was calm. I understand them better than you think. Michael slowly sat back down. David walked toward the evidence table. Mrs. Brown, did Michael ever discuss Diane's signatures with you? Patricia nodded. Many times. What did he say? She took a long breath. He practiced copying. The courtroom became perfectly still. David asked carefully, You're certain? I watched him. When? Late at night. In his office. He filled pages with Diane's signature. Again, and again, and again. Rachel whispered, "Oh, Mom." Patricia continued, "At first I thought he was helping Diane complete paperwork. But one night," she swallowed, "I asked why he needed so many practice sheets." David remained silent. Patricia looked down at her hands. He smiled. "What did he say?" "He said," her voice nearly disappeared, "no one questions a familiar signature." Several people in the courtroom gasped. David then handed Patricia the newer version of Diane's will. "Have you seen this document before?" "Yes." "Where?" "On Michael's desk." "When?" "Before Diane died." The words landed like a thunderclap. Michael's attorney immediately stood. "Objection. The witness is mistaken." Patricia looked toward him. "No. I remember because I asked Michael why he was reading Diane's will while she was still alive." David spoke quietly. "What did he tell you?" Patricia laughed bitterly. "He said, 'I'm planning ahead.'" Rachel buried her face in her hands. The timing matched everything. The courier letter, the forged signatures, the secret company, the hidden room. It had all been part of the same plan. David held up another document. "A loan agreement." "Do you recognize it?" "Yes." "What is it?" Patricia looked toward the judge. "It never existed." "What do you mean?" "Michael created fake business debts, so the estate would appear nearly bankrupt." "Why?" "So he could convince everyone the house and sewing shop had to be sold." David nodded. "And after they were sold, he planned to buy them." The courtroom erupted again. Judge Watkins struck the bench repeatedly. "Order," Patricia continued before anyone could interrupt. "He already had a buyer." "Who?" "A company." "What company?" Patricia pointed toward the corporate filings. "Brown Holdings, LLC." The realization spread through the room. Michael hadn't planned to lose the family property. He had planned to own it, secretly, at a discounted estate price, then transfer it back to himself. David had only one question left. "Mrs. Brown, why are you telling the truth now?" Patricia looked toward Rachel, then Ethan. "Finally." She looked at me. "Diane visited me when 3 weeks before she died." "What happened?" Patricia's voice trembled. She already knew. Knew what? Everything. She didn't yell. She didn't threaten me. She simply held my hand. Tears rolled down Patricia's face. "And she said," Patricia struggled to continue. "Patricia, one day you'll have to decide whether you're protecting your husband help destroy himself." The room remained silent. I couldn't sleep after that. I kept hearing her voice. I kept looking at my grandchildren. I realized she wiped away another tear. I stayed quiet. I had become exactly like Michael. David sat down. He had no more questions. Michael's attorney slowly stood. His shoulders sagged. He approached the witness stand. "Mrs. Brown, you understand your testimony could expose your husband to criminal investigation." "Yes." "You understand it may affect your own financial interests." "Yes." "You understand," he hesitated, "your marriage may not survive this." Patricia looked directly at Michael. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then she answered softly, Our marriage ended the day he chose money over his own family. The attorney closed his notebook. No further questions. Judge Watkins called a brief recess before announcing her ruling. Everyone stood quietly. Michael remained seated. He looked older than he had that morning. Smaller somehow. Not defeated yet, but no longer untouchable. As we gathered our papers, Ethan suddenly noticed something lying inside the envelope Patricia had delivered. A tiny black memory card, smaller than a postage stamp. He held it up. David, I don't think this was in the evidence list. David examined it carefully. It's a micro SD card. Rachel frowned. What could be on something that small? Patricia's eyes widened. I forgot. Everyone looked at her. She whispered, Michael always kept a backup. David's expression hardened. A backup of what? Patricia slowly answered. Everything. Bank records, emails, scanned signatures, private recordings. She looked at the tiny card one last time before adding, and the password. She took a deep breath. Is Diane's birthday? At that moment, every one of us realized the case wasn't over. Because if Michael had truly backed up everything, then the smallest piece of evidence in the courtroom might contain the biggest secret of all. None of us spoke as David carried the tiny micro SD card to the evidence table. It was astonishing. After everything we had uncovered, the hidden room, the surveillance videos, the forged signatures, the shell company, it seemed impossible that one memory card could still matter. Yet something in Patricia's expression told me otherwise. Judge Watkins returned to the bench. Mr. Miller, I understand additional evidence has been identified. Yes, Your Honor. David held up the micro SD card. It was discovered inside the envelope voluntarily delivered by Patricia Brown. Michael's attorney immediately stood. We object to any delay. Judge Watkins looked toward him. The court is interested in reaching the truth. She turned back to David. How long will it take to review the contents? David answered honestly. Less than 30 minutes. The judge nodded. This court will recess. David inserted the micro SD card into a secure evidence reader. A single encrypted folder appeared. Rachel held her breath. Is it locked? Yes. David typed Diane's birthday exactly as Patricia had given it. The folder opened instantly. Hundreds of files appeared. Emails, scanned contracts, digital signatures, accounting databases, and one folder named insurance. David clicked it first. Inside was something none of us expected. A life insurance policy, issued 15 years earlier. Policyholder, Diane Parker. Primary beneficiary, Rachel Parker. Contingent beneficiary, Ethan Parker. Michael's name appeared nowhere. Rachel frowned. What does this have to do with anything? David opened another file. A scanned letter from the insurance company, then another. Finally, an email. His eyes widened. Karen. What? Look at the date. The email had been sent only 5 months before Diane died. It confirmed that someone had requested a change of beneficiary. The request had been denied because the signature did not match Diane's records. David slowly looked toward Michael. You even tried to change her life insurance. Michael stared silently at the table. Another folder contained scanned signature practice sheets. Hundreds of them, page after page. Each carried Diane's name written over and over again. Some neat, some crossed out, some almost perfect. Rachel began crying. He really practiced. David quietly nodded. This is exactly what Patricia described. The metadata showed the files had been scanned from Michael's office computer. Each timestamp matched the weeks before the forged will had appeared. Judge Watkins examined several pages herself. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Then Ethan opened the final folder. Its name was simply Voice. Inside sat dozens of audio recordings. Most lasted only a few seconds. Voicemail backups, phone conversations, business calls. Then one recording stood out. Private, do not delete. David pressed play. At first we heard only the sound of a car engine. Then Michael's voice. I don't care what it costs. Another voice answered, the bank manager from the earlier video. You already have control of most of her accounts. Michael laughed quietly. Most isn't enough. The manager hesitated. And Ethan? Michael answered without emotion. No one believes him anymore. A long pause followed. Then came the sentence that ended everything. When Diane dies, the rest belongs to me. No one moved. No one even breathed. Judge Watkins slowly removed her glasses. The courtroom remained absolutely silent. Michael closed his eyes. For the first time since this nightmare began, he looked defeated. Judge Watkins called everyone back into the courtroom. She spent several minutes reviewing her notes before speaking. This court has reviewed substantial documentary evidence, including financial records, video recordings, corporate documents, and audio evidence. She looked directly at Michael. The court finds significant evidence that the will dated 6 months before Diane Parker's death is not reliable. She turned another page. Accordingly, the court suspends recognition of that document pending formal forensic examination. Rachel squeezed my hand. Judge Watkins continued. The earlier will shall govern temporary administration of the estate. Rachel burst into tears. The house, the sewing shop. Everything Diane had intended for her children was finally protected. But the judge wasn't finished. She looked toward the county prosecutor seated in the gallery. The evidence presented today raises substantial questions concerning fraud, forgery, conversion of assets, and possible criminal conduct. She paused. This court orders that certified copies of today's exhibits be forwarded immediately to the district attorney for criminal review. Michael lowered his head. His attorney quietly placed a hand on his shoulder. Neither man spoke. Outside the courthouse, reporters crowded the courthouse steps. Cameras flashed in every direction. David declined every interview. So did I. Rachel simply wanted to go home. Ethan stood beside the old maple tree outside the courthouse, staring toward the sky. I walked over. What are you thinking? He smiled sadly. I wish Mom could have seen this. So do I. He reached into his pocket. I almost forgot. What? He handed me a folded letter. It was inside the last journal. I didn't notice it until this morning. The envelope bore my name. Karen. My hands trembled as I unfolded the paper. My dear sister, if you're reading this, then you kept your promise. Tears blurred the ink. You always believed that truth matters. I lost sight of that for a while. I kept rescuing Michael because I confused forgiveness with permission. Please don't make the same mistake. I paused, struggling to continue. Forgive him if your heart allows it, but never protect him from the consequences of his choices. That isn't love. It's surrender. Rachel quietly leaned against my shoulder. Ethan stood beside us. For the first time in years, our family stood together again, smaller than before, but finally honest. Over the following months, life slowly began to heal. The district attorney opened a criminal investigation based on the evidence presented in court. Brown Holdings, LLC, was dissolved after investigators traced its financial activity through the records Patricia had preserved. several forged documents were formally invalidated by forensic handwriting experts. The original will was admitted to probate exactly as Diane had intended. Rachel inherited her mother's home. Ethan returned permanently to Cedar Hollow. Together, they reopened Parker Family Sewing. The old sign stayed exactly where James had hung it decades earlier. Inside, they added one small brass plaque near the entrance. It read, "Integrity outlasts deception." Patricia eventually moved into a small apartment across town. Rachel visited her often. Healing came slowly, but it came. As for me, I retired from the library the following spring and moved back to Cedar Hollow. Not because the town had changed, but because my family finally had. Every Saturday morning, Rachel, Ethan, and I shared coffee before opening the shop. Sometimes we laughed. Sometimes we cried. Sometimes we simply sat together in comfortable silence, and every time I passed the old sewing machine Diane loved so much, I remembered the lesson she left behind. The greatest inheritance isn't a house, or a business, or even money. It's the courage to choose the truth, even when that truth breaks your heart. If Diane taught me anything, it's this: love should never require you to ignore what is right. Real love protects people. It does not protect lies. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this story. If Karen and Diane's journey touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who believes that truth and family still matter. I'd also love to hear your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done if you were Karen? Your stories and perspectives mean more than